You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, we have some news out of Fulton County, Georgia. That's where Trump is being investigated right now for asking Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to find 11,780 votes that didn't exist. So the grand jury in that case provided District Attorney Fani Willis with exactly what she requested, which is a roster for who should or shouldn't be indicted and for what. So the DA has this report now. We expect that to be released as early as Thursday of this week, most of that report anyway, but we'll go back to that in a moment. But first, what happens next? What's the timeline here? Because it looks like this will be the beginning of what will be a pretty blockbuster next step here.
It's hard to predict precisely what the timeline is going to be from here on. We've got a couple of nice data points, though. Remember, a week or two ago, District Attorney Fani Willis said her charging decisions, presumably based on everything we know, that means her decision to actually indict people is, quote, imminent. Now, we're still waiting to figure out precisely what imminent means to District Attorney Willis, but I still hold fast to that word, believing that it means, within a matter of weeks or maybe a month or two, not 6 months or a year down the road. We also, now that we have this litigation largely behind us, Judge McBurneys has said on the 16th of February, I will release a few portions of the grand jury's report. However, he said, I have to let District Attorney Willis finish her investigation, and I have to protect the due process rights of anybody she indicts. We can talk about that in a minute. So it feels like Judge McBurneys was signaling, the investigation in its entirety is likely to wrap up soon, and that would look like indictments. And then I can release the entire report, which he did say he will be releasing sometime in the near future. So as best I can tease out, Brian, it feels like we may be within weeks, perhaps even days, but certainly weeks of finally getting some indictments down in Georgia.
But that is the next step, right? There's nothing else that we're waiting for to happen. At this point, Fani Willis has the report from the grand jury that was convened. The next step is just to decide whether or not to indict the people that were named in that report, correct?
That is the next step. Now, technically, everything that was done by the special grand jury, which just issued the report, that report will then be presented to the regular grand jury in Georgia. That is the grand jury with the power to indict, and they will be asked, presumably, to indict the people that the special grand jury recommended should be indicted. So it feels like we are at the end game of the grand jury investigation in Georgia.
Now, the final report is going to remain mostly sealed, as you explained, except for 3 sections that will be released this week. Why seal most of it, and also why unseal those 3 sections?
So why unseal the 3 sections? I think because Judge McBurneys was trying to balance the public's interest through the media. A number of media organizations brought suit to, have Judge McBurneys order the release of the report in its entirety to the public. And he says, look, there is really a searing public interest in what the grand jury has concluded regarding Donald Trump and any of his criminal associates that they might recommend should be indicted for violating Georgia state law. But he said he also had to balance that against, and here's an important buzz phrase we heard from Judge McBurneys in his ruling, he has to balance it against the due process rights of individuals in the future. Now, let me just break that down into layman's speak. Who is it in the context of a criminal case that has the most due process rights? That would be the defendant. So when Judge McBurneys said, listen, I'm going to release some, the introduction, the conclusion, and the section on lying witnesses, which we can talk about in a minute, those are the only 3 sections I'm inclined to release right now because we still need to protect the due process rights of, inferentially, the defendants who are about to be indicted. Again, that's another, I think, important data point that Judge McBurneys used that buzz phrase, due process rights. So everything in the 8-page ruling that we just read from Judge McBurneys militates in favor of a conclusion that indictments are coming.
Okay, so one part of this that you just referred to here was that the jury is going to explain who lied under oath, which witnesses lied under oath. Is it fair to effectively expect perjury charges to be handed down on whoever we find out within this section that will be unsealed did lie under oath?
You know, Brian, that is my favorite part of Judge McBurneys 8-page ruling. He says, I'm going to release to the public Section 8 of the grand jury report, because that's the section in which the grand jury said, we think some people came before us, were placed under oath, swore to tell the truth, and lied to us. Now, Judge McBurney was careful to say those people aren't named. The lying witnesses aren't named in the section that is about to be released to the public. But here's why that is actually an enormous bonus to this investigation. Not surprisingly, witnesses often lie in the grand jury. And I've had this happen countless times when I was putting people before the grand jury as part of criminal investigations. There are three main reasons witnesses lie. One, they're loyal to the defendant, to the target, to the person we're investigating. Or two, they are fearful of the defendant, the target, the person we're investigating. Or three, they might have some criminal culpability themselves. And here's what I do before I go into the grand jury. With every single witness that I suspect might lie, I say, listen, you have to tell the truth. You're going to be placed under oath. And here's one thing I can promise you, Mr. or Miss Witness. If you go in there and you lie to my grand jury, I will ask the grand jury to consider indicting you for perjury if I can prove your lie was about a material fact, and I believe I can prove you lied to my grand jury. I will ask the grand jury to indict you for perjury. I will ask the grand jury to indict you for obstructing justice, the grand jury's criminal investigation. I will ask the grand jury to indict you for accessory after the fact, because your lie will have the consequence of making it more difficult for us to hold accountable the defendant, the target of the investigation. So in a very real sense, you will be helping the target of the investigation get away with his crimes. And I will now look at you as if you are a potential co-conspirator, because maybe you've gotten together with the target or others and decided you should lie in the grand jury. So what I can promise you, Mr. or Miss Witness, is you will have a world of hurt coming your way if you lie to my grand jury. Now, what you're going to do? Sometimes that had the desired effect of loosening up the witness and getting them to tell the complete truth about the crimes of others and their own crimes if they were complicit. But it's not surprising that when guys like Rudy Giuliani were forced to appear before that Georgia special grand jury, Lindsey Graham, Mike Flynn, and others who fought tooth and nail to avoid testifying about the crimes of Donald Trump. Lindsey, for gosh sakes, went all the way up to the Supreme Court trying to find a friendly judge who would rule that he didn't have to testify before the Georgia grand jury. Every single judge ruled, Lindsey, go in there and testify, and you better do it truthfully. Now, I don't know if those three men are three of the liars that, were spotted by the grand jurors. But what I do believe is Fani Willis will now have potentially extra leverage over the people who lied to her grand jury, and she can use that leverage to charge them, to flip them, and to develop them into cooperating witnesses. So I always told witnesses who I suspected would lie in the grand jury, the lies won't help you. The lies won't help the defendant at the end of the day. But you know what? Those lies will sink you. So it's your decision to make. We'll learn more about that come the 16th when Section 8 is released by Judge McBurney, and we learn more about the liars, even if we don't learn their identity at that point. But when I read that, I saw that as a good development for the grand jury investigation.
So is part of the reason that they don't release this thing in one fell swoop, this report in one fell swoop, so that someone like DA Fani Willis can take this newfound information that we had, for example, the fact that we now know that there were certain witnesses who may have lied, and use that to continue working to flip them to help, prove her investigation or prove her potential indictment, for example?
Yeah, that's certainly why DA Willis would have asked Judge McBurney to hold off on releasing certain portions of it, because once you kind of let the evidentiary cat out of the bag, if the entire report was released, that will actually deprive DA Willis of some of the tactical advantages and tactical moves she still might want to make, like stepping to these lying witnesses and try to flip them and bring them on board against Trump and his criminal associates. So, but Judge McBurney is really not in the game of prosecutorial tactics. His only decision was, is it in the public interest for me to release this, or will it damage an ongoing investigation if I release it? And how do I balance those competing concerns? And you can see in his 8-page order, he kind of took an incremental approach. And I urge everybody to read that 8-page order. It's really thoughtful. It's well-reasoned. It's supported by case law. And he seems to be striking the right balance.
Now, Glenn, people are going to watch this video and they're going to say, look, we're always one step away from Trump being indicted, and it never happens. I mean, we've been through years of that. What would you say to those people based on this update right now to kind of restore their faith in this process?
You know, Brian, I'd say a couple of things. Today, we are one day closer to Donald Trump being indicted. Of course, that would be true every day if Donald Trump is ultimately going to be indicted. But, you know, these are concrete developments that we see. You know, once Fani Willis completed her grand jury investigation, she presented 75 reluctant witnesses, and the grand jury has issued a report that I can all but guarantee says, here are the Georgia state crimes that were committed based on the evidence that was presented to us, and here are the people who should be indicted for those crimes. That is a concrete step and a concrete development. And the other thing that it's just kind of an overarching observation. Nobody has ever criminally indicted a former president of the United States. But, you know, just because it hasn't happened yet does not mean it won't happen. I believe the people in the Fulton County, Georgia prosecutor's office, the New York district attorney's office, goodness knows the Department of Justice, I believe they know what the stakes are. And I believe that they're going to get there in their own time. Now, one of my persistent complaints is they haven't gotten there quickly enough. They haven't met the moment of the danger to our democracy presented by a guy like Donald Trump. But I do believe they're going to get there, and they're going to get there in their own time when they believe they've done everything they can to maximize their chance of a conviction at trial, because that is the ultimate end game.
To that point, you know, you and I have touched on this before, but we're talking about a crime where Trump is on tape asking Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to find enough votes for the express purpose of anointing him the winner of an election that he lost, votes that didn't exist, imaginary votes. I mean, as clear a crime as you could possibly find. Is there any defense for Trump here? Is there any reason why DA Willis would choose not to indict if and when we find out that the jury has recommended indictment?
There is zero defense that Donald Trump has. There is zero reason, as best I can tell, that Fani Willis would have to decline to indict Donald Trump. Brian, when I had the good fortune of trying cases, including RICO cases, in which I had wiretap evidence, I called it a press play trial. I pressed play on the old, a cassette recording machine, tells you how old I am. And you would hear the defendant, who was sitting across the courtroom from the jury, committing the crime on tape, on a recording. That's what we have from Donald Trump's just find me 11,780 votes and corruptly declare me the winner. And he threatened Brad Raffensperger that in substance, you could be prosecuted if you don't do that. I mean, talk about a gross abuse of power on top of the Georgia state election crimes Donald Trump was committing. There is zero chance he won't be indicted in my book. There is zero chance, almost zero chance, he won't be convicted. I think the biggest question is, upon conviction, does Donald Trump land in prison, or do they give him some sort of a pass by putting him on home detention?
Yeah, we've spoken about that before as well. For the record, I will say that I also listened to tape cassettes, and I have very distinct, vivid memories of walking down the street with a Walkman strapped to my belt, listening to tapes. So not that old, Glenn. We except for, and if anybody's like younger than, I don't know, I don't know, younger than 30, I guess they wouldn't know that stuff. But I, I have a little shred of my completely obsolete technology over here on this end too.
I also used to listen to reel to reel. So, I mean, that is way back in the day. I know I've got you by a few years, but, I happen to look very youthful.
That's it. That's it. Well, we should all be so lucky to look like you I speak for myself when I'm your age. So with that said, for anybody watching, to keep on top of this case in particular, which is the one that we've been, watching especially closely down in Fulton County, make sure to subscribe to both of our channels. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.